the midsummer night today, so we have enough light for the whole day to have enlightening talks, as it says. So I'm really happy that you're all here. Looking forward to a very good session today. We also will have the possibility to visit one of the major scientific sites of this region, the ESS and the MAX 4. So I'm also looking forward to this. So let me first of all, again, thanks for the organization in the background. It was really a lot of work to make this possible, because we have 2.5 days full stuffed with a very intense program. You see our sponsors here in the last line, not really at the moment, but I want to mention it is the Swedish Science Council, is Chalmers University was doing a lot of work in the background. Also the Swedish net was very helpful, and of course the support program, especially our two main supporters from the project, Jan and Fotis, who did really a lot of work. So in this sense, I do not want to waste time and hand over to Sverker, who is the co-chair at the moment, which has also a logic, because he's representing Sweden also in our group. And Sverker, please, if you can come to the next point. So I'm looking forward for a nice and intense day. And Sverker, please go ahead.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Sverker Holmgren is my name, from Chalmers University of Technology. And as Stefan said, I have been an e-IRG delegate now for 17 years, I think it is. So not 20, but a long time. So almost as old an e-IRG as e-IRG itself. Welcome to Sweden. Welcome everybody that is here. Welcome also those that are remotely. And I will introduce the program of today and do this very quickly, because we have a tight schedule. So I will also use very short presentations of the speakers, just to make sure that we actually can get through the program. So let's see, I will try to switch on here. So usual housekeeping rules. I will leave that. We have a workshop that has been organized by a program committee, of course. And you see the names here, and the program. Well, we have this anniversary session today, and then we have 3 more sessions coming tomorrow. And between that, we have this visit at MAX 4 and ESS. So again, welcome. The opening here, well, it is me then. I will hand over very quickly to Malin, who is the other Swedish e-IRG delegate, and she will say welcome from the Swedish Research Council. Stefan has already talked, so we will keep him out of this for the moment. And then I will moderate the session. So I will quickly give the word to Malin.
Hello, everyone. And welcome to Sweden on behalf of the Swedish Research Council. I am, as you know, new here. I am the new Mikael Borg, for those of you who met him. And so my responsibility is in HPC questions. And I'm really excited to have you all here, because you have all this experience that I yet lack in this area. So welcome very much.
We move on to a short intervention online by Vasilis Maglaris from Greece. And Vasilis has been active in Greece, mostly in networking, been running and building the Greece network, but he was also instrumental in the creation of e-IRG 20 years ago, together with the commissions and Maxivanidis, yes, exactly, from the commission at that time. So maybe it would be very interesting to hear a few words from him. 5 minutes probably to get an introduction and his view on e-IRG and what has happened during these years. So let's see if we have Vasilis online. Stop sharing. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. Allow me. Okay, fine.
So do you share your presentation yourself, Vasilis?
I will try to do so. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been a long time. I haven't been to this group, but I was there 20 years ago when we started e-IRG. And let me just say a few things. It was back the Italian and the Greek presidencies back in 2003. And we had a key role in the birth of e-IRG and the structure of e-IRG, at least the early structure of e-IRG. In my capacity as chairman of the GEANT, the Greek Research and Education Network at the time, I played quite a role in structuring this body. And later on, I was chairing the governance of GEANT. So for about 8 years or so, I was also involved in European infrastructure policies. Let me just say that this whole effort, which is a pride of Europe, is made possible thanks to the national research and education networks of member states and GEANT, which culminates in a federated effort, a European effort. Also, we should add to that GRID initiatives. Early on, we called them GRID, now we call them different names. So there was EGE and EGI, and of course, that couples with high performance computing, PRACE and clouds and so forth. I should mention here a few things about the role of the European Commission that was instrumental at the time. And I have to mention Mario Campolargo, who was the director of this infrastructures program, Kostas Glinos, who succeeded him, Bernard Fabianek, who was instrumental also in creating regional efforts, Kyriakos Baksevanidis, who was also very instrumental in creating e-IRGs. And I should mention here all sorts of regional initiatives, Humanity Connect, SIREN, Southeastern European region, the Black Sea Initiative, Africa Connect, Red Clara, TIE-IN, and so forth. And of course, the whole vision of e-science, that's a British UK term. Unfortunately, the UK is not with us anymore. I didn't see any participant, any UK participant in today's workshop, but still we profited a lot from their experience. And those people from the European Commission were also instrumental in promoting transatlantic connectivity with Internet 2, NLR, Canary, and so forth, Far East, South Africa, Ukraine, and Russia, with lots of question marks because of the war and all of the problems that it created. Let me just say here that we had a success story, our global collaborations on high performance computing and networking with CERN, high energy physics, high performance computing and PRACE, ESA and Copernicus and so forth. And what we accomplished in reality is that we brought big science to the desktop across region and divides. And finally, least but not last, we were instrumental in promoting teleworking and telepresence and preparing our ecosystem for the years of COVID-19. Of course, this whole effort had its problems, and some of the things I wanted to mention here is some of the problems that I was able to pinpoint. And certainly e-IRG will play an instrumental role in resolving some of these problems in the present and in the future. The first item I want to stress is that we should by all means reduce public co-funding, national governments, federations, the European Commission, and so forth. And I bring as a counterexample what's happened to the United States. The United States, as you know, was instrumental in creating the internet innovation, but it left it in the 90s, public support in the 90s because of the so-called private sector benefits. It bounced back, of course, by 2010, and this was partially thanks to the Obama administration initiatives. And I mentioned here the community anchors, the NSF Genie, global innovations and so forth, and the Internet 2 Next Generation Infrastructure Program, which is currently under progress. At any rate, lessons learned is that we need to encourage competitions away from frozen monopolies, public or private, to promote smart management and control of multi-domain virtual organizations. Virtual organizations was coined by our community to name organizations specific targets with specific targets, and we should promote that across edge and core, optical and 5G, 6G networks, and steer innovation via green, I stress green, sustainable, open public research infrastructures. We shouldn't be inhibited by research risks. After all, innovations rely on cost-effective virtualized platforms. And we should encourage global cooperations between academic researchers, industrial concerns, and give open access to massive data. We live in the years of big data, and caution should be put on privacy, via anonymization, and so forth. But of course, we should enforce federated AI and so forth. Finally, we should try to even further promote entrepreneurial spirit of young innovations to establish promising startups and spin-offs. I end my intervention here. I just wanted to say good luck and may the force be with us. Why do we need the force? More than ever, because although we accomplished a lot, there are many more things expected within the rather complicated and obscure global picture. And I talked here about the environmental risks and about the wars that are now in our backyards. And I'm talking about Brexit that not allow our British colleagues to share their experience even closer with us. And finally, I wanted just to say that I was quite fortunate that I participated in all three levels of federated e-science infrastructures. I was initiator of my university's campus network back in the 90s. Then I created the Greek NREN, GRNet. And finally, last but not least, I was also chairing the policy committee of GEANT. So for 6 years or so, I was there, trying to promote European efforts and trying to strengthen global cooperations. Thank you very much, and again, good luck. Thank you.
Thank you for this historic view and also an outlook towards the future. And I will leave the word now to Fotis Karianis, who is a well-known person in many European fields, actually. So Fotis is in the support project for e-IRG, and he's been there for quite some time, doing a lot of work, practical work for e-IRG. He has also been the Greek delegate for e-IRG for some years time ago. And we thought in the program committee, it might be a good idea to actually give the role to the support project to recapitulate what has been done in e-IRG during the 20 years. So what has been accomplished. So I will leave the word to Fotis, see if he can get the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Sverker. So 20 years of e-IRG. Yes, I've been also an e-IRG delegate for some years, and I've been there 20 years. So I will go quickly. I have a lot of slides. This is a joint presentation with Jan and Michalis from the support project. I will say a few words about the start of e-IRG. Vasilis, I think, covered quite a lot of documents. I was also surprised that we had so many documents. I was going through the past. So only some highlights because I have many slides. The main impact is the infrastructure commons, which is a key component of EOSC. A few words about the e-IRG chairs, timeline, and closing remarks. So it all started in 2003 with the definition of this e-infrastructure, the EU Infrastructures Initiative, it was called at the time. You see there Vasilis, Kyriakos Baksevanidis from the EC, and Mario Campolargo from the EC. And, the Greek presidency, the General Secretariat was, yes. Okay, sorry. Switch to the display, something with this would be probably displays or something. Okay, thank you. So yes, and one of the major. Does it work now? No. Hmm? Okay, it works now. Okay, so sorry about the problems. So one of the key recommendations of the first ERG workshop in June was the creation of ERG. You see there, the establishment of the infrastructure reflection group. And then the mission was defined later during the Italian presidency. You see some slides from Kyriakos, and also the environment interfacing with other bodies, you know, the policy area with the you know, recommendations, questionnaires, position papers, and so on. So a plethora of documents, not only quantity, but also quality. I think you see there many white papers, roadmaps, task force reports, specific reports for ESFRI, and some other reflections on the different developments, GEANT, EOSC, EuroHPC, and so on. And so some highlights, white paper 2004, you see here the definition of the infrastructure at the time, networking layer, resources layer with everything, digital libraries, the databases, you know, computing and other resources, and middleware. So this is interesting. And also, you know, some of the topics, AI at the time already, acceptable usage policies was an important point, user support, and so on. The first roadmap, the definition of the infrastructure, you see integrated ICT-based research infrastructure with you know, networking, computing, storage, and so on, interdependencies also, and interrelation among the different components, and start to think of them as a system. So already the idea of the commons was introduced in 2005, was thought, not maybe introduced, but already in the back of the mind. 2006, already a task force about sustainable infrastructures. You see the recommendation 2. It says the existing infrastructure projects must be superseded by integrated sustainable services at national and European levels. Already in 2006, sustainability. And again, some of the topics there in the white paper, AAI, usage policies, education and training, incentives, middleware, and so on. Roadmap, another nice figure with the horizontal and vertical VOs at the time with the grids, and some of the topics again. Updated mission, you see now the user-centric you know, idea, open and user-centric, intersectoral cooperation. Cooperation was key, coordination of efforts. So seems very familiar and very close to what we are doing now already many years ago. Some of the task forces, education and training, and also the first report on data management already in 2008 or 9. The white paper 2009, so dealt with, you see here, grids and HPC, the tiered, so EGI, NGIs, and praise on top with the tiered, you know, centers. And the cloud was already introduced in 2009 and service-centric infrastructures, and sustainability, of course, also. Updated mission in 2010, so paving the way towards a general purpose European infrastructure, so the horizontal element of infrastructure serving, you know, all the thematic ones. Service orientation, again, the data at large, as Vasilis said already in 2010, commodity computing, so from industry, so and international cooperation. Blue paper, yes, this was a paper for ESFRI, and you see a table, you can't read it, but this is the, you know, the requirements of the ESFRI projects and their priorities with from 0 to 4. So this was done. I didn't remember it. And And some of the other topics of the blue paper, you see the data infrastructure, PIDs already, metadata, schemas, and so on, unified access security, and so on. White paper 2011, you see energy and green IT already then, exascale, impressive, data infrastructures again. So, and we come to the infrastructure commons with a roadmap to 2012. This was a major output, as you know. So in a changing world, there was a need for integrated services and interoperable infrastructures, new social and technical developments, and user requirements in science. And this is the idea. What is the commons? Can be defined as the integrated living ecosystem of resources and services, along with the policies and governance that is open, user-friendly, and accessible to European researchers and scientists, and continuously adapting to the changing requirements of research and science. And you see the bottom part, you know, with all the layers and also the related services and the vertical the esprits and so on, the other thematic communities, clouds and so on. So this is interesting, you know, the three components, the three core functions of the infrastructures: community building, high-level strategy and coordination. One, of course, then the operational part, the service provisioning, and the third one, the innovation, because of course in research you have to have always to innovate. So these are three components also embedded in the European Commission work programs. I think this is clear. So EOSC was based on the idea of the infrastructure commons. There was also an ERG support document called the Marketplace for Infrastructure Services that we, as a support team, expanded and you know, defined some of the key elements of EOSC at the time. Points of access, catalog of services, search, research and commercial services, compliance, and the rules of participation, AI, multiple views of the different portals. So at that time, Carlos Moraes Pires told me that this was one of the documents that constituted the Open Science Cloud. So a key contribution. And then, you know, Roadmap 2016, emphatic cooperation among all major stakeholders, providers, users, and funders, and policymakers. A joint, at that time, it was said that a joint infrastructure ERIC, so joining all the different components, and this was discussed at the ERG, still seems to be far away. Thus, the only way forward is good coordination through a formal coordination platform, and we are discussing this currently after, you know, several years. So impact, this reached also with the help of some of the ERG colleagues, reached and their ministries, reached the highest level at the competitive council, and there were EOSC was created already then, and there were recommendations to get organized at the national level and also European level and use ESPRI-ERG and other initiatives. So then the national nodes document was created in response to the council conclusions of 2018 with this document in 2019 with a questionnaire. You see 28 countries, reflections on the different infrastructure providers and the areas, coordination and governance, funding and national policies, integration of the thematic and generic domain agnostic infrastructures. There was diversity, of course, different countries have different models, but still some patterns were identified. And then, you know, the coordination topic also resonated in different documents, the new era, the Pact for Research and Innovation, the recent council conclusions, and the ERA policy agenda, Action 8 on research infrastructures with increased cooperation between among all players. And including through EOSC. The recent one to last white paper 2021, which was focusing at the coordination on institutional, national, and regional levels. So coordination is continuously needed at national level among all players, and it should be expanded within and across countries. You see at the institutional level, and we hear the case of Chalmers today, and also the case of the Netherlands at the national level. At the regional level, at EU level with the recent white paper, and some good practices were identified in the white paper and documented. The last one, the last white paper, it was about coordination and collaboration at EU level. So main recommendations to European and national infrastructure providers, coordination among all stakeholders. So, you know, after many years, again, this is timely. Form a forum or assembly that is currently being discussed, with ERG having a facilitating or a neutral role. And to the Commission to, you know, to let's say, provide strong incentives for cross-platform innovation across infrastructure, thematic arise across the thematic and the horizontal arise and so on. To also recognize the importance of infrastructure in the realization of EOSC and provide a clear definition of EOSC, and also to the thematic infrastructures to, you know, to follow this forum or assembly and provide, you know, the user-oriented needs. And we have invited today some of the user side, let's say, infrastructures. So a glimpse on the ERG chairs. I hope I didn't forget. I didn't have the time to go through the very first, but I think these should be the ones. Patrick Arts from Netherlands, and also a bit of profile. You see mostly computing and data guys. Although it was considered that the ERG was more NRN based, we didn't have actually a chair from the networking. Leif Laxonen, Gudmund Hurst. We'll hear Leif Gudmund. There is a video message later on. Sverker, of course, still here. Gabriele von Voigt, Paolo Budroni, the one to last, and Stefan here. And you see a timeline with all the documents and the presidencies over the 20 years. So I won't go through it, but you know, different types of documents and reflections on different you know, initiatives. So the landscape is changing. So closing remarks, plethora of documents and recommendations, several reached the highest political level. The current topics already discussed many years ago. It was impressive, you know, seeing exascale and other incentives and so on being discussed so long a time ago. Several old recommendations of ERG are still timely, and in fact more timely than ever, even with the changing landscape. So as the coordination and data management. EOSC, of course, as an instantiation of the infrastructure commons, and 20 years of voluntary work from the ERG delegates, still ERG is still relevant, although it is not directly linked with funding decisions. And this is important, while other bodies are linked more to funding decisions. So ERG brought together all stakeholders, policymakers, funders, providers, users, and impact at all levels, institutional, national, and European. And we hear about these in the next talks. Thank you very much.
History in one single document. So we will now move towards some examples, maybe we can say, some examples of the impact and what has happened with the ERG recommendations. And the first one is a long-term also member of ERG from the Netherlands, Arjen van Rijn. With a background and also is active in high energy physics community and NICEF, but also was instrumental in the creation of EGI, so one of the infrastructures that is currently around. So please, Arjen.
Sverker, and it says a personal journey, and actually it's I will represent the past, you will represent Ron the present and the future. Compared to some of you, I'm a rookie in ERG, only 11 years, but that will show in my slides. If it works, actually. Spacebar. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm from NICEF, and I'm not showing this slide to have you get accustomed to all the details, but just to show around some of the years that NICEF and its predecessors have started. Yes, I am from a user community, from a research community, and that is, I think, the main message for this slide. And to mention a bit of the history, I also want to show the, let's say, the predecessors of the Dutch e-infrastructure players, of which we now all know it has ended up in SURF, but that was not always the case. So in 1971, SARA was established. That was the Compute Center for two Amsterdam universities and the National Mathematical Center. In 1986, the Stichting SURF, Foundation SURF, was established. And actually, the Dutch abbreviation means Collaborating University Compute Centers, SURF. Brilliant abbreviation, by the way. And it was established by Hans Rosenberg, who was actually an astrophysicist. And in 1988, actually as a branch from SURF, SURFnet was established. So whilst SURF in its abbreviation was called after compute centers, actually the network was the main reason to establish SURF. And in 1988 also there was a foundation established, the National Computing Facilities Foundation, NCF, with director Patrick Aerts. He was mentioned as the first chair of e-IRG. So that is some of the historical players in the Netherlands. Some of those you will not see reappear later. Meanwhile, these very important events took place, and why do I mention them? Because some of those actually started at NICEF. So RARE, which is later called Terrena, is now actually GEANT, had their first offices at NICEF. RIPE, which is the Internet Registry, also had the first offices at NICEF, and the Amsterdam Internet Exchange, the same. Just showing that my institute has been really involved in all these developments from the start. But this was all before I came to NICEF, so I should give credit to all my predecessors here. When I came, that was 1 January 1999, I sort of fell into the discussions going on at CERN on distributed computing for LHC data, which became Data Grid. In the Netherlands, that was supported by a couple of projects, and it ended up in what was called BigGrid, which was really a big project for NICEF, together with two other parties again, NCF, this same National Computing Foundations, and the bioinformatics people, who were also well organized in the country. So those three decided to roll out such a distributed computing infrastructure in the Netherlands, and chose SARA, this compute center, as their main running partner. And this project, amongst others, delivered our Dutch Tier 1 for the worldwide LHC computing grid. And then in 2008, something happened that I think determined the outcome later for the role of SURF, and that was that a report of a so-called national ICT, directive body, regieorgaan, it says directive body, was published on ICT facilities for research, and basically they advised the Ministry of Education, Culture and Science to bring all ICT facilities under one roof, preferably SURF. I have to say that we, again, had a lot of influence on, NICEF people, other people, on how this was written in this report. But if we would have written it, nobody would believe it. If this national body wrote it, the ministry would take this advice over. So then, indeed, in 2009, it has been mentioned, Amsterdam Science Park wins competition for hosting the EGI head office. In 2012, I joined e-IRG, actually under Gudmund, who we will see later. And then in 2013, after the end of this big grid project, it emerged that SURF and SARA merged into one organization, but still there were 3 separate entities: SURFnet, SURF-SARA, and SURF-Market. The grid infrastructure, as I say, was incorporated in this national e-infrastructure, and there was the first victim. NCF was meanwhile dissolved, so this organization was considered obsolete. I take a big step. NICF and SURF are still working together very closely in the Dutch national e-infrastructure. And in 2021, I would say the final step in bringing all the flavors of e-infrastructure under one roof has been accomplished by having one business unit instead of 3 business units of SURF. Well, what is my takeaway from this? That is, change takes time. I think I mentioned to Kees Neggers, the then SURFnet director, in 2006 for the first time, wouldn't it be nice to have computing and networking and what have you under one roof? But it took some years to get this done. You need a bit of luck, the right project on the right moment with the right people. It helps be closely located together. I'm totally biased, of course, but having a very demanding user community research infrastructure help develop the infrastructure is a strong force. And then to bring things under a roof has a very simple reason, because researchers and research communities are really not interested who brings these services to them. They just want it to work, right? So they don't want to see the various flavors. So again, I'm biased, but SURF as the infrastructure provider in the Netherlands has really worked out. And this is why I'm such a big fan of the national node approach that has also been very prominent in the e-IRG agenda for the last couple of years. That was my historic view. And now I hand over to Ron to tell the present.
Thank you, Arjen. My name is Ron Augustus. I'm part of the board of SURF. And hearing the presentation of Arjen, I'm very aware, I have to be very humble and thankful for all the members like Nick that have helped to form SURF in the past years. But looking ahead at the future, knowing that the IT industry does not respect tradition, but only innovation, how do we really move on and play a role and be relevant in the years to come? We do that in 3 different verticals and on 3 different levels. The first vertical that we work in is education. The second vertical is research. And the third vertical is overarching or combined. And overarching or combined means activities there are both useful for education and research. And we play on 3 different levels. A local level, where we do innovative projects and see if they work out. Then the strategy is aimed at forming ecosystems on a national level, because if we can be organized on a national level, we can make more impact and synergy. And by combining SURF-Market, SURF-Net, and SURF-SARA into one organization with one finance system, with one HR system, with one, let's say, way of working, you can be more powerful on a national level and on an international level. And the third level is being more proactive and connected on international activities that are going on. So if you fill this in from an education point of view, yes, we do, let's say, local education projects. We formed an ecosystem on a national level to change and transform the national Dutch landscape in higher education with a program of 600 million euros for 8 years to make IT also a core component of being more flexible in education, using more learning materials based on IT, and basically transform, because you can have IT parts, but if they're not used for transformation on the national level, the impact is low. On the education side, there is no, let's say, international European organization that is logical to talk to. So we're pretty much involved in setting up that organization together with the EC to see how we can, let's say, internationally work together in this way. For research, it's the same thing. Yes, there's a lot of, let's say, individual projects going on to see if we can be innovative. But if we cannot transform the way of working on a national level, it's hard to make impact. For open science, we have formed an open science directing body where universities of applied science, the university libraries, and the research institutes and supporting institutions come together to make decisions how to spend the national funding on open science. So with that, we have one voice on open science. On infrastructure, that's not yet the case. So we're very busy together with the ministry to form such an ecosystem to make decisions on how the future of the infrastructure landscape in the Netherlands will look like. This has to be looked at in an international context, knowing that you can be proud of your local HPC petaflops, but looking what's happening internationally, you have to be connected from an HPC perspective, from a grid perspective, and also looking at future technologies that are coming on, thinking about quantum neuromorphics and AI and how that can be integrated in your services. So we're forming the internet of the national ecosystem on the infrastructure part. There's plenty of international organizations to work with. Luckily, there's e-IRG, there's EuroHPC, we work with EOSC, of course, but also others, EGI, praise all the other institutions that we want to be, let's say, proactively involved with. Because if we want to move up the stack to a national level and to an international level, that means that SURF needs to, let's say, be more, we have to have more resources and more board presence, both on national and international level. And this is what we're trying to achieve. The same is true on the overarching part, where we have a lot of, let's say, innovative projects, but if they're not used, why do it? So there's a national body for cybersecurity with building to a national security operations center for university medical centers. So we're building that. GEANT is here our logical partner from an international perspective. We are the Dutch NREN, so in that sense, we don't need to have any other, let's say, national body in place. But there is a discussion to form a new body on public values, as it should be build systems open source instead of buying it from the commercial vendors, because as an education system, you want to make your own decisions and be less dependent on others. And finally, on the bottom, we see there's a LOP in our approach, and the LOP is thinking about long-term technologies that will affect all three pillars. Think about quantum computing. So we're involved in quantum computing, especially on the hybrid quantum computing side. How will it affect HPC and quantum together? Quantum communications, involved with Delft on the quantum communication networking and the impact on security. Neuromorphic, so could that be an answer on the durability and less power on our computing centers? AI, building a Dutch natural language GPT model, because we think that should be something that is steered by the government instead of being dependent on US-based companies. So these are projects that we're doing for the longer term. What we are more and more finding out that our partners in discussion, the board members of universities, and also the boards that govern the university boards, do not always have enough ICT knowledge to understand what's happening and what impact that may have on their institutions. So we are spending more and more time on explaining the impact technologies may have on institutions, especially on managerial level, doing sessions for them, workshops, learning programs. And this is something that we see as a new additional way to help our institutions to make decisions, because ICT is becoming more and more part of the issues on the table of university boards, and it wasn't in the past. So we made, let's say, technology trend reports. We're starting to do that more often in the future, both in English and in Dutch. And finally, the reason we exist is because we think that doing things together will help building our systems on public values. All the services that SURF provides, you can buy from competitive or from commercial companies, even supercomputers. So the reason we exist is we want to do this together, that thinking that working together, we can have a better leverage in buying power, in setting privacy standards, and making sure that we are still driving the future. So setting, let's say, a compass for public values that we made together with some partners in the Netherlands to have a discussion on choices to be made, especially with boards and with CIOs of universities and research institutes, helps us also to take on this discussion further, not only from a technological side, but also from a values point of view. And with that, we hope to be helpful, not only in the Dutch national level, together with members like Nick, but we have to look at international institutions like GEANT, like e-IRG, like EGI, to think about the future together, because we know the only future forward is an international cooperation where SURF could act as a one node from a Dutch perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for not introducing you earlier. So I think one note that was in the presentation that I got is that on your spare time you teach art history and science history, and that's an interesting point. So thank you. So Daniel, we will have my presentation first. We're about 10 minutes late, just so that you know. So no problem. You can wait. Very good. So I am now in the bit tricky task to share myself. So I was asked to present an example of how what has been done in e-IRG has impacted also the local level, the institutional level, and I will try to do that. I think the example at the national level from the Netherlands is impressive, and it also shows what you really can do if you have an integrated e-infrastructure. You are much more powerful than if you have a sort of a system that is more dispersed. So Chalmers E-Infrastructure Commons, well, that's my organization in a sense. I'm a director for that, and I will try to explain what it is, but also give an outlook a little bit on the Swedish situation and the history of e-commons. So I see nothing happens. Space. Yeah, try that. Very good. Very briefly about Chalmers. So Chalmers University is one of the old universities of technology in Sweden. Medium-sized university. What is special is that there's a lot of collaboration with other entities, and it's actually 17% of the publications are co-authored by industry. It might not seem like an impressive number, but if you look globally, it's there's a ranking on this, and we're actually 5th in the world. So a lot of collaboration with industry, both locally in Gothenburg region and in Sweden and internationally. And of course, there are also main research efforts, the European Graphene Flagship, and also the main Swedish quantum computing initiative is at Chalmers. So, well, this is a slide from a presentation for Chalmers given by me in 2016. So Chalmers at that time saw that we need to do something about our local research infrastructure, or local e-infrastructure. And I was asked to give a presentation of what is going on in Europe. And of course, I presented the e-infrastructure commons. So this slide, well, it shows the cloud that was actually manufactured at that time. Earlier, it was just horizontal bars, but clouds became sort of popular at this time, EOSC, etc. So this was taken on. Also, I showed this slide, and it's actually been showed already. So what are the core components of the e-infrastructure commons? The community building, the service provisioning, and the innovation part. I was at that time at Uppsala University. So this was then taken on by Chalmers. But first, let me do a little bit of a detour and show you the Swedish context here. So in Sweden, we have 10 main research universities, as Chalmers is one of those. We have national e-infrastructures, not a single one, but several of them. So we have NICE, which is now the predecessor of SNIC, that was there earlier, owned by Linköping University, just got the EuroHPC system. You have heard about that yesterday. We have Swedish National Data Infrastructure, which has the task for finding, describing, sharing research data, owned by Gothenburg University, but in fact, in reality, working as a consortium of all the big universities in Sweden. So that's an important point. We have SUNET, connectivity, and also selling other services to universities. And here is an anomaly, really, because almost all research infrastructures in Sweden, national, are owned by universities, and SUNET is part of the Swedish Research Council. Looking at the sort of open science EOSC branch of this, the universities and the Swedish Research Council and the National Library have a mandate from the government to get to a open science research system by 2026, which is sort of tomorrow in reality. In EOSC, there are 8 universities now members of EOSC, which is a high number internationally, and the Research Council is the mandated organization. Well, Sweden is a member of the LUMI consortium for EuroHPC, and as I said, it will also now have a national EuroHPC computer. But there is no single sort of integrated structure here. Well, at the European level, we already heard the e-infrastructure commons. It has been taken up at the European level and is a sort of a foundation for EOSC. So the integrated e-infrastructure is needed. We have e-IRG that has presented further recommendations on integrated national infrastructures, data infrastructures, and the national nodes concept that has been implemented in the Netherlands. In Sweden, well, the Rectors Conference has really said that we need this too. So they, together with the Research Council, presented this, I think in 2021, yes, proposed that there should be an integrated national e-infrastructure commons. Actually, they used this terminology. The proposal then went through the utredning in Swedish, which is investigation, and now it is in another investigation. So it is at the table of the ministry, but being dealt with slowly. And I guess this is also what Arjen said, change takes time. We have a national university roadmap for open science that the Rectors Conference also has adopted and now are implementing. So that is moving on. Meanwhile, then at Chalmers, so going back locally again, and they start working. So there was a group with a mandate to propose a new model for digital research infrastructure at Chalmers. They had surveys, hearings, discussions, and they worked for 4 years, anchoring the idea of initiating Chalmers e-infrastructure commons that was then decided by the president in late 2019. And 2020, well, there was a hiring process for a director, and I applied for this, and I was recruited to be the director because I think it's very interesting now to be back on the factory floor to implement what that actually has been proposed by groups that have been, albeit at the local level. So we have started working. You may note that spring 2020 was a bit of a special time. Especially to try to build something, a new infrastructure. So I started the 15th of May. I did not really go to Chalmers the first year. So the mandate for Chalmers e-commons is to give support to Chalmers researchers, digital support, overall digital support, based on data-centric workflows. So the data comes in here. Support for data collection, management, computing using HPC. So HPC is part of this. Data storage, visualization, sharing and publishing of data. So that part is also there. And the long-term preservation archiving. So everything is included in our mandate. And the idea is that the researcher at Chalmers should be able to go to Chalmers e-commons and get help. Maybe not from our organization only, but we should point to the right expertise. And that is also important. We really have the task to look for the best services, the best resources for the research. We don't have to provide it ourselves. So if EuroHPC is the best provisioning, we should help writing a good EuroHPC application. We work closely together with the regular IT services, the library, the archive. We actually manage staff at these entities. And that's an interesting situation, I think, for many universities. And we provide the interface to international and national infrastructure. So we are the node in the Swedish National Data Service. We are mandated to participate in EOSC. I am the EOSC delegate in the General Assembly for Chalmers, etc. So this is really implementing this common structure, but at the local level. So in the ecosystem then, well, the researcher can go to Chalmers eCommons. Maybe we point to a national initiative or to an international initiative. And of course, we have a choice here. How do we participate in international initiatives as Chalmers or via the national initiatives? And I think in a situation like in the Netherlands, where SURF is there, it's very natural to go through the national organization. That situation has not really happened in Sweden yet. Okay, we also have a business model, and that is pretty important when you try to build this type of infrastructure. So we fund Chalmers participation in national and international infrastructures. So we pay the fee to participate in EOSC. We pay the fee, or we'll probably pay the fee to participate in NICE, which is now building up, etc. And then we have a basis grant, which is a research grant that goes to our funding, that we can, using that we can provide free at the point services to some sort of base level. And then if you have more extensive needs, well, then you need to provide funding, and we have a sort of a price list which is at cost. So the relation to e-commerce, well, I think it is pretty clear, actually. So we are set up to be this sort of framework for e-infrastructure. We do the community building. We do provide the services, and there is a flexible, open, and competitive approach. So if another entity is providing service, well, we can point to that, and we should point to that. And we do implementation of innovation projects with our local staff. And I think this, in the end, we can see that the influence of e-IRG and this SIMPL presentation in 2016, it was important. And if we go to European Open Science Cloud, well, again, we are set up to be an environment with open and seamless services for storage, or provide access to that environment. And we will participate in EOSC federating existing data infrastructures, either locally or through the Swedish National Data Service. And that is also pretty clear. And we do then, as a final remark, we integrate the digital expertise, the e-infrastructure, and the data management sharing in one single organization. So locally at Chalmers, we do not have a yin-yang model, which has been sort of proposed and indicated by EOSC. We put it all together in one organization. I'm not saying that that is the really, I'm not arguing that that is the thing that you should do at the national or European level. I'm just saying that you need to decide. It has to be clear. And at this point, I think there are different views on this at the European level and maybe also on the national level. So I will stop there. And thank you for letting me presenting this. Okay, so now we will let Daniel in and see if we can resolve that. So the next presentation is by Daniel Gillblad, and he is here. That's excellent. So Daniel is the co-director for scientific vision at an entity called AI Sweden, which is the main entity for AI research and also innovation in Sweden, and has been active in the area and the field for many years, both towards companies' innovation and in research. And we hope that Daniel will give his view on the future here, and also maybe a little bit on the connection to e-infrastructure. So I will leave the word to you.
Thank you. If you can't hear me clearly, please wave or something like that, and I'll try to pick it up, and I'll try to immediately share my screen. So yes, thank you for the introduction, Sverker. Great to be here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about next generation AI infrastructure, what I in my role have been working with for the last few years. Talk a little bit about my personal view on where we are and where we're heading. There are no certain answers, I feel like, at the moment for what this type of infrastructure and use of AI will actually really look like. It's a little bit up in the air, but we can at least see a number of things. And I'm going to start with the absolutely obvious that all of you have tried and actually perhaps been also part of working on and developing. As a machine learning and AI researcher, I have to say that the development of the transformer architecture a few years ago and the kind of applications that we see now, not only in language, but also in computer vision and so on, has changed a lot of the game, and a lot for the better. So 10, 15, perhaps 20 years ago, when I started working with these things, of course, we tended to always reinvent the wheel. We built again and again new machine learning models for different applications that were relatively similar to the previous ones, but needed to be specialized to a certain set of data, a certain set of tasks. Now we have arrived at a level where we're talking about models with a few or zero-shot learning capabilities, which can answer questions which are way more open than they used to be. A few years ago, when we started to here in Sweden to develop this kind of shareable large-scale machine learning models, we weren't really calling them foundation models, but I guess this is a pretty common term right now. Models that can be reused, that have basic capacity for a huge number of tasks. And this is really, really changing everything, not only within research, of course, but also in our connections at Chalmers, for example, with the companies and so on. What we need to be working on as a university and based on what tools to be relevant to the future of industry. And even though we can see some of these things, for example, large language models and so on, taking a more and more dominant place, we do not know exactly what the infrastructure and ecosystem will look like. If you look at, for example, GPT-4 and these kinds of models, there are different ways of interacting and putting your own data into them. Those might be ways forward to solve a large number of problems, and that's going to affect what the infrastructure looks like. But if you look at, for example, Anthropic's new models and so on, they have very, very, very large context windows in which you can, in your prompt, basically put in a huge amount of information that the model can then process. We don't quite exactly know what this kind of ecosystem will look like, but we at least have a few directions. And we also know that these things are going to be incredibly important, not only for language and vision, but also for example, as we're working on here at Chalmers with, for example, drug development and drug production, etc., etc., etc. So let's just recap a little bit, the change in fundamental perspective using natural language processing as an example. So prior to 2018, we basically trained a machine learning model for each task. I know this is oversimplifying things, but typically this is what we used to do. After 2018, we started to build models that could be highly specialized, more fundamental models trained on a lot of data, such as BERT and similar things, that could then be specialized to more specific tasks. But after basically the release of GPT-2, GPT-3, we can really see that this very large language model, where we don't necessarily need to specialize at all, actually works for huge amounts of tasks. We can actually just train models on predicting the next word and use them with clever prompting and clever question asking to perform a huge amount of tasks in natural language processing. Now, none of these scenarios for AI is going to go completely away. We're going to definitely see a mix of them, but the main development are these models that are very, very general, that can answer very, very open questions. So let's just take an example on the scale of actually developing something useful here. So these are rough numbers, very, very rough numbers. This is rough numbers for large language models that we have developed for Swedish. Models that work well, that can perform tasks, not of course at the level of GPT-4 and so on, but can actually be useful for many, many different applications, range from the number of parameters in these neural networks from a few 100 million to a few billion, but typically it feels like, at least for Swedish now, the sweet spot where we sort of stopped is around 40 to 60 billion parameters. That's where the sweet spot is, basically. We could train larger models, but we're not quite sure of the benefit. These models perform reasonably well, and we might need better data instead. So the dimension of these kinds of things, basically, what are we talking about? Well, we're using roughly 350 GPUs to train one of these larger 40 to 60 billion parameter models. It takes roughly 2 months on a large infrastructure. It takes 400,000 to 500,000 GPU hours. I mean, these are just rough estimates. So these are not things we want to do again and again and again. So we need to make sure it works. We don't want to restart these things way too often, basically, because it takes quite a lot of resources. And we need to be super careful of what we put in there. And that's also one of the learnings that we can take on from what we've been doing recently. It is not at all, scaling in terms of number of parameters is still important, and it gives the models new capabilities, but it is quite a lot of a data game as well. Making sure that we have the right text data to put into these models, data for example, instruction tuning, this kinds of data, question and answer data that actually makes these models act more as interactive agents, and actually perhaps even performing these things like reinforcement learning with human feedback and so on, that really, really tunes the models to perform well in these kind of interactive scenarios. But this is pretty rough, and you can see that it takes quite a lot of time to develop one of these models from scratch. So we really, really want to share these things once we have them. An additional development that we can see very, very clearly, and definitely in some use cases where we can see that these kinds of language models are starting to eat up whole scientific fields or development and innovation fields, like, for example, we're getting sort of in that direction a little bit in drug production, where the language models are key development, not just as an interface, a humanly usable interface to perhaps more complicated models and knowledge, but also as an integrator, integrating different, for example, in the case of OpenAI, using different kinds of plugins that it can actually call different other systems to provide simulations, to provide feedback, to provide more structured calculation, etc., etc. We see some open source efforts going in this direction. And last but not least, these kinds of models are now quickly going multimodal, and the Swedish models that we're training, we have, I think, probably trained our last, focused on training our last pure text model. Now it's going to be multimodal models, incorporating images, incorporating speech, etc., etc., etc. Perhaps even some action. So we're living basically in a world where we're building more and more complex systems of these models working together, sometimes trained separately, building on each other, and the applications on top are yet again a combination of a lot of these things. So in a sense, everything got a little bit easier when we built models that we could use not to reinvent the wheel, but again, all of these things open for new application avenues that really make use of a lot of these things in combination. So I think that we're at a stage where for many, many applications, we're not going to look at single-use models anymore. For research and evaluation, absolutely. But for many, many applications, also in science, it's going to be a combination of a huge number of models. So let me just comment on something else that is, of course, happening at the same time. And now I'm using a colleague's slide here, and he's very, very fond of animation. I'm not, so I'm just going to browse through some of these animations. I apologize if you are distracted by things moving on the screen. But it's basically the fact that a lot of these applications that we're working with at the moment are not possible to centralize. Not the machine learning itself, because perhaps we're talking about putting together data on patients from several different hospitals, regions, and so on in Sweden, and putting together, combining data, for example, from vehicles traveling outside on the road, etc., which have limited bandwidth. We're going to have to live with not only centralized machine learning applications, but federated machine learning applications, distributed machine learning applications, swarm machine learning applications, and decentralized AI in general. Again, putting further possible challenges on the future infrastructure on AI, basically, where we're, in one sense, want to go to bigger models, foundation models, etc., but we have a very strong pull in the other direction. So this will need to be incorporated. Let me just click through all of these lovely animations that my colleague set up. Another development that I think is worth mentioning in terms of these large-scale models and so on is that evaluation becomes slightly different. It's, of course, so that we need really, really high-quality data set to build high-quality models. And high-quality data sets are often what is actually left when we have developed, for example, a large language model. The model might be trained again. It might need to be updated, have to be updated. New things come out architecture-wise that we might want to use. But a lot of time, the high-quality data that was collected can be reused. It's an artifact that really means something. And the benchmarks developed to actually check model development, is it performing as it should, etc., etc. It's very, very diverse at this moment, but it really does not capture everything. I would like to say that benchmarks are probably, for very large language models and multimodal models and things like that, are to a degree going to be more like unit testing in software development, something that we use to guarantee certain performance levels and so on different types of models. But then we need to push these things into sharp applications to see what actually works and not. And we need a typical feedback system here. So even if we develop these kinds of more academically oriented large language model for Swedish, we need the application feedback. Benchmarks are simply not enough. So we need to set up our basically infrastructure and architecture to handle this in the future. And it's not like this is something new for the industry or anything like that. If you're looking at, for example, this is a OpenAI's development process, they already know that they do this kind of initial development, alignment, evaluation, deployment, assessment, etc., etc. And it's a very iterative process. And again, for some resources within our future AI infrastructure, we're going to have to live with that. Finally, we will have to start evaluating some of these things in the wild on real world applications. We do not get enough feedback just from developing these things. And I think it's important for research, it's important for societal value to guarantee that these things perform as they should. And in terms of that, our perspective, at least at AI Sweden and partly at Chalmers, changes a little bit, because all of a sudden, it's always been an engineering problem, but it's perhaps becoming even more of an engineering problem. We need to engineer models, collect the right data, build the right applications, align the models, make sure that they scale the training and inference to large infrastructures, etc., etc., etc. AI is very, very much an engineering problem, and a lot of the development in AI is perhaps driven by AI as an engineering problem, not actually as small research projects, but actually developing large models and applications. So AI research infrastructure. But has the case for AI research infrastructure changed? No, absolutely not in my mind, at least. There have been some really good reports, and I think they still hold, even though the architecture for AI might look a little bit different or broader. We need a counterpoint to industry where we can run a certain type of project. We need these to make sure that we can drive independent research. And we need to provide some kind of democracy in computation. And this is challenging now, especially when private companies are really buying up a lot of the GPUs and stuff like that, that other people might want to use. So this is still a little bit of a challenge. And for us then, as practitioners and researchers and also developers of some of these basic resources for Sweden, so what can we do basically? Yeah, we can buy our own small systems. Those are useful for testing and so on, but not for actually running these large-scale training nor inference. Of course, we can go to Google Web Services or something like that, but as independent research or government-funded research organizations, this is often very, very expensive. So what we want and what we at least partly need is infrastructure. Now I'm pointing to Sverker's infrastructure here at Chalmers, infrastructure for research that is at the scale that we actually need, and that we can allocate resources at that are large enough and we have for as long time that some of these projects actually take. So that is a super important way forward. Some numbers, I'm not going to comment on this. This is just some other available infrastructure that we're looking at, for example, in Europe. I think the main lesson learned here during the last few months is basically that there are compute resources, for example, within Europe that we can use for some of these things. It's always a balance. If we're talking directly about architectures and so on, a lot of the stuff that we want to do within large language models is easier to do on NVIDIA infrastructure. If you want to do it on AMD and so on, it takes more development, it takes more debugging, might take more resources, and even further, other types of hardware and so on might demand even more development. But of course, we do not want to end up in a situation where we only have one provider and so on. So this is a delicate balance at the moment. But finally, just a couple of slides. I see now a very broad view of joint AI infrastructure where we need to look at a lot of different types of AI artifacts and resources. Compute is super important. We need that. We absolutely need relevant, high-quality data sets, preferably at least some of them partly free, so that we can actually have open development and research on this kind of models. We need to combine these things with metadata, structured knowledge, all of these things basically, and it's models that need to be shared and made available to accelerate the development and research on top of these things to a very, very large degree, basically. Finally, for example, using benchmarks, publishing benchmarks, developing benchmarks is usually at least as important, sometimes more than developing data sets and so on, so that we have something to drive development. So we're looking at something that can provide a lot of these things. And we have challenges. We have the problem that we might not be able to move data around, but data need to be at the data center where we compute. Same with benchmarks, same with the different types of models that we want to use as part of our research. So it is a challenging situation. But basically, to sum it up, I see a future with lots of interconnected AI artifacts. We need to provide systems that can actually work with these things. A broad interconnected infrastructure to at least some degree, where you actually will have to interact with the outside world for at least part of your training or part of your application. Inference is way more of a blocker sometimes now than actual training of the models. We can usually solve resources for training a large language model, but to provide it to other researchers is difficult because not many researchers can instantiate and run a 60 billion parameter model just for their research. We need to share resources here and have resources for inference for common tools and models. I find that a lot of people are really, really good at this, but I would say compared to how many are working with AI, I think it's honestly relatively few research groups with capability and knowledge of how to utilize large infrastructure. That could definitely be made easier, and that we could have a push here to actually democratize this kind of AI development. And of course, I don't see really an end on the need for computation and how diverse this kind of hardware needs to be. So probably we're going to be able to and will utilize even more compute, both for training and inference in the future. And with that, I would like to say thank you and see if perhaps there are any questions or something like that that I could possibly answer.
Thank you, I think we need to refer questions to email and other, because we are running late and we have a bus to catch at lunch. So sorry for that.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. No problem. Sorry.
So what we will do is to thank you very much. I think this was very good, very interesting, and it also gives an input. Not just only computing is important. There are other aspects also. So with that, I thank you. I think we end this session. We have a very short break now. So 5 minutes to get out, get some coffee. You can find at the end of the corridor some accessories for the coffee, but please come back as soon as possible and we will try to catch up. And thank you. Thank you, Daniel.
So everybody, I think we should start with this session because Sverker's 5 minutes have ended up being 15 minutes. So people remotely are also waiting. This session is quite crowded with a lot of presentations, short presentations, and it's up to me to try and squeeze this in the available time. This is the layout of the session, and the title is pretty evident: the future of e-infrastructures. Well, that is what e-IRG is about. What do you want me, Jan, to? Okay. Very good directions. Okay. I think we should just simply start by the first message, which is a video message, and I'm just looking at. Who is going to start the video message by Gudmund Host, who was happened to be the chair of e-IRG when I entered e-IRG in 2012. So let's start with that.
European infrastructure collaboration is more important than ever. Today, most countries are faced with serious economic challenges. As a consequence, research funding is under pressure in many countries. Also, in many countries, politics seem to be less predictable and more short-lived than before. Internationally, the same pressures apply, and we tend to forget that there is still a post-pandemic effect. We didn't travel for 2 years. Now there is less traveling than before, which is good for the climate. But less traveling results in increased challenges for international collaborations. I believe that the international collaborations tend to be less committing than before, less committing and shallower. So it is still very important to meet face-to-face, which I regret that I didn't have the chance to do today. It is very positive that e-IRG continues to hold regular meetings and conferences where stakeholders can meet and socialize, where they can grind their views and they can find alignment. Sustainability remains to be a big challenge. E-infrastructure initiatives will continue to be born, they will live for a while, and they will die or get reorganized. But e-infrastructure initiatives tend to be mutually dependent. Currently, the names are GEANT, EOSC, and EuroHPC. Some years ago, they were called GEANT and something different. In the future, it might be EOSC and something different. The mutual dependence strengthens sustainability in the sense that if one component or organization struggles, it can lean on the other components for survival, for rearranging troops, and come back in new forms, even better suited for the future. People are core in the sense that people are also infrastructure. e-IRG is still e-IRG after 20 years. I'm happy to see that e-IRG is still around and that the infrastructure of e-IRG, which is the support project, has been sustained through these years. e-IRG appears to be sustainable both in its name, its core functionality, and in its many familiar and long-serving representatives. As such, it is one of the components that add to the sustainability of the full ecosystem of European infrastructures. Congratulations on 20 years anniversary and best wishes for a successful workshop.
Well, he's not here, but let's give him an applause. And I think Hans, Stefan, you wanted to have this briefly followed up by a statement from you as current chair. Sorry, the next slide. Right. Now, but not for the remote participants, I'm afraid. Okay, go ahead, Stefan.
Thank you. I now have the possibility, and I try to be very brief, which is very difficult, especially after this very precise and very good words from Gudmund, and I really fully support what he has said now. It's about the e-IRG vision on the future of the era, also in connection to the 20 years anniversary session here. Yeah. Sorry. That doesn't want me. Oh yes, it wants me. When it comes to vision of the e-IRG, it's clear for us that we want to facilitate the integration in the era of European infrastructures and connected services. And I want to use here another, let's say, new term. We are talking about information architecture in general here, which is, I guess, the only word to explain all of this. And the participants and the delegates and the experts of e-IRG, they are the architectures of these. And we have seen this in the previous talks before. It started in 2003, and we managed to be the architects of what we have now. So I want to carry on and combine this with the mission, with the support of a coherent, innovative, and strategic European infrastructure policymaking, which is a very strong sentence. We could take part in all these policy developments during the years now. And of course, we will carry on with this. So it's about the development of convergent and sustainable e-infrastructure services. So the vision and the mission remain relevant, in fact, more than ever, as we see it now in the current situation, in this new landscape with our main players, again, GEANT, EOSC, EuroHPC, the Euro data space is coming up now. Most important, I guess, is to remind and to keep in mind the infrastructure commons as the political, technical, and also administrative framework for an easy and cost-efficient share use of distributed electronic resources across Europe. I also want to mention in this connection the e-IRG outlines of Europe's need for a single e-infrastructure commons. And the e-IRG stresses the need for e-infrastructure coordination at the national level, so the domestic level, and a strong national building blocks, already mentioned also from some of our previous speakers, enabling the coherent and efficient participation in all these European efforts we have now, which was also stated in the e-IRG roadmap in 2016. I will then repeat the importance of the role of the national nodes, which was already mentioned, which was in the national nodes paper from 2019. The e-IRG also addressing the good practice of coordination, which is a core function of the e-IRG, with and across horizontal infrastructures and thematic domain-specific research infrastructures, which was also postulated in the white paper of 21. e-IRG thematicized the coordination among the European infrastructures and the need for collaboration at various levels. to realize the concept of the infrastructure commons, as stated before, and its institution as the European Open Science Cloud, which was a main part of the white paper 22. As we also have seen in the history of e-IRG and all these various initiatives in the European research area, which started from grid to cloud to virtualization to containers to edge. So technologies are evolving extremely fast. AI, for example, the infrastructure and infrastructure for AI. And there's this big complex of quantum, which is currently knocking at the door. Both fields have been mentioned before, but AI will play in a very important role also in combination with data. Here again, I can mention the term information architecture, because there's no artificial intelligence without information architecture. And then I want to repeat a very good slogan I heard the days before. Artificial intelligence is fun, but it is fun as soon as you have the data for it. And this is a very important aspect for the future reflections in e-IRG. This brings me to the next step. It is clear computing is moving to the data. So the importance of the data complex in all of these activities is a hard fact. The service layer to become much more important as well, also connected to the data complex and an infrastructure in itself. So for example, the AI, semantic web technologies, workflows are on top. An additional layer of abstraction will be of utmost importance in the next developments. And this seems also to include, of course, new players, where we do not know who they are and how they are conceptualized. So scientific silos are still in place. This is a big problem we have to solve in the upcoming years. So common European data spaces are domain specific. There's a need to see to what extent they will be using horizontal infrastructures, services, and the EOSC. There's a bit of a discussion going on also on the policy level about this, because the data spaces are domain specific. They are a theoretical invention. The European common data spaces, not the data spaces which have already existing. So we will have a lot of work on this complex in the near future. So at the end, I want to mention software and all its versions is recognized as essential part of reproducible science, which we are all working on. Coming now back to the layer of e-infras, GEANT, and the NRENs, so to say, so the network of NRENs in whole Europe and beyond. The only transparent commons up to now. An example, the users are using it in most cases without even knowing it exists. And I can tell you, especially the policymakers do not realize that the NRENs in the background working and functioning and making everything possible which is connected to e-infos and research and the communication of data. They do not even know that they exist. So we're working on that. And I'm sure this will lead to, let's say, a stronger presence and a stronger voice for the NRENs. Innovation needs to be continued, as well as operations and community support, which also leads to the complexity of giving it a sustainable future. EuroHPC centers and interconnection also are key areas for the future. There are a lot of upcoming discussions from most of you know, also taking part in the EuroHPC developments, that this is a big issue. also connected to the data issue. And last but not least, the EOSC and the national activities. And here I want to mention two main components. The commons part, so the portals and the marketplaces, and the open science part. So the open science part has slow progress as expected, because it's more an evolutionary process, and we know this takes time. It needs a cultural change. It needs a lot of efforts in terms of training skills and verification, and different progresses are currently the situation, and different levels of maturity in different communities. This is a hard fact, but we also tend to overcome this by carrying on with including it in the vision of the e-IRG. The commons part, as already mentioned, and under brackets, the portals, is an opportunity to provide added value for the users. So we shouldn't forget about this aspect as well. Coming to the complex of the Euro common data spaces here, and the thematic data spaces versus the overall idea of developing the European Open Science Cloud. There is different progress, and there are requirements for different areas. It is still the development at a relatively early point, and the procurements are ongoing for both, for the European Science Cloud and for the implementation of the data spaces. So the objective to create an interoperable data market needs simple middleware, and this is more or less the key in this project. Also relying on the experience we have with the e-IRG and this field in the last years. EuroHPC is one of the big ships in Europe concerned with data infrastructure. Is focusing on its own activity as expected, because procurement of such machines is rather complex and difficult. The procurement of centers, pre-exascale, and European processor initiatives, which are correlated to these developments, the training, the competence centers, centers of excellence, the energy efficiency problematic, and so on, will be a big part of what we have to integrate in the upcoming discussions here in the group, and is also a sign of the complexity of the current situation when we look at the European scenery. The coordination with other components has to become soon more important. I will stop here and go to the next point, the infrastructure assembly. The process started to establish an assembly to facilitate the coordination and the cooperation among the European infrastructures. Most e-infrastructures related organizations gave us a positive reaction when we are asked and had discussions, and first discussions, real discussions under the Czech presidency. And it was GEANT, it was EGI, EUDAT, OpenAir, and PRAISE reacting on the first discussions we had. And we came to the conclusion that we will work on a strategic coordination. And this is planned for the benefit of the e-infra users. So there is a process going on. And of course, this is part of our vision to give here possibilities for the e-infras also to get a stronger voice in all these procedures. What else is, let's say, an important prick or element of our work at the moment is the contribution to the S3 EOSC task force, which is already in construction. e-IRG will be an observer in this task force. And this is for ensuring a structured interface between the S3 and the EOSC steering board. And you can imagine how important the e-infrastructure component is in all these discussions. Therefore, we bring in our competences, of course, to fire the discussion here. So this all relies on the fact that there is a better coordination among horizontal e-infrastructures and thematic research infrastructures needed. And we worked on this since many years and will carry on to be one of the main facilitator here in this discussion. So e-IRG can bring voices of the infrastructures in. Here are coming back to our initiative together with the big infrastructure groups. And what we are doing, of course, is to work on EOSC governance and financial sustainability. Also with the perspective of the change of the programs, which is important on a level of funding, of course. So there is an informal liaison with the EOSC steering board, of course, and the EOSC association, and there are various, let's say, playgrounds where we exchange with all these groups. So just to carry on, we also have in our vision the realization of the infrastructure commons across all components and the seamless user experience and the holistic research experience, without going into detail. And to do this is more or less the same. I will go to the acknowledgements, but yeah, I also have to shorten this up because we are not right on time. But this is very important, is to say that the EOSC supporting program, the EOSC SP7, has received funding from the European Union. We are now in a situation where we are fading out in September, but there already have been discussions about how we carry on with the sustainable funding, and you will see we will manage this as well. So with this, I will close and go to the next sessions, because otherwise we run out of time. I know about this. I'm gone. In a way, you make my
task easy, because there is not much time left for the moderation at the end of this session. I ask for the patience of the people that are attending remotely and are waiting for their turn. Well, we are evidently, I think, 15 or 20 minutes later. I hope you're still around. I know some of you are in other conferences, own conferences. So without further ado, I think we should move to the next block, which consists of a couple of short keynotes from EC and other key infrastructure initiatives like EOSC, EU data spaces. And the first one, I hope he is online. Tobias, are you online? Could you say yes or no?
I am, and I'm happy to be.
If you say no, then it's a bizarre answer.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Tobias. Maybe we can see you.
Yes, I hope so. The camera is on. Hello.
Yes.
And you might be able to see my screen also, I hope.
Want to yes, now you're starting sharing your screen.
Excellent.
Okay, go ahead, Tobias.
I hope it's the right screen, so you see the presentation mode. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting us, and happy birthday. I hope you'll have a great event and also a fun event to celebrate. I must say, Stefan already introduced many points I wanted to make, so I'm confident to be able to be on time. Otherwise, please interrupt. Let's have a quick look back. I think, where do we stand? We are in an extremely lucky position now to have really high quality research infrastructures and e-infrastructures that are a key component and a basis for our scientific excellence. And we all know they are crucial enablers of research and technological innovation. And of course, in order to best suit the needs of different scientific domains, because of the different scopes of research and infrastructures being national, regional, European ones, there's a large variety of them. At the same time, of course, there are important benefits in bringing them together and collaborating with a view towards integrating or to provide an integrated ecosystem or world-class and accessible national and pan-European research infrastructures. Now, when we look into e-infrastructures a bit more specific, I think this collaboration aspect is probably even more complex, because they are to be seen in the wider context, and Stefan explained this very well, I think, of all digital infrastructures, those that are already in place and those that are being put in place or will be put into place. So here the coordination role is obviously a very important one. And of course, we have also taken note of the e-IRG proposal for an umbrella e-infrastructure forum, etc. What I would like to do in this short presentation is to give a helicopter view of some, and this is really only a selection of some of the strategic digital capacities being currently put in place, but also to highlight some elements and probably some visions on how we can help in fostering interoperability, in fostering coordination among them. Now, I will start very briefly, and in principle, now I should be at the next slide. This works. Excuse me. Okay. With our European strategy for data that was published in the year 2022, with the whole idea about making sure that we can tap on the real rich amount of data for science, for public services, for industry. With the main principle underlying is that data can flow freely within the EU, so across borders, but also across sectors. There's a focus on making sure that we have high quality data available, also for innovation, but all of this in a context in which we respect European rules and values. Now, without wanting to go into the complete legal framework that is being put in place on this, just to mention that obviously underlying in terms of regulation, there's the GDPR to ensure a very high level of data protection. There's the Data Governance Act to ensure trust in data transactions, and the Data Act proposal to ensure fairness in the allocation of data of the different actors in the data economy. Now, what has been mentioned already is that as part of the European strategy for data, 10 common European data spaces have been proposed. And as Stefan rightly said, yes, 9 of them are sectorial data spaces. But we shouldn't forget that we also have EOSC, the European Open Science Cloud, that actually serves as the basis for a research and innovation data space. And by the nature of EOSC, it is by default transsectoral, supersectoral, and will also need to be seen in the broader picture of how to connect to other data spaces. And it is exactly about this, how to connect and how to ensure consistency and interoperability between data spaces, that there are 2 initiatives, one of which has been mentioned already, that I would like to very shortly mention. I mean, we all understand that in order to integrate interoperable between data spaces, there's a technical component, there's a governance component, there's a content component. So I'm addressing this a bit more from the technical component now. There is the Data Spaces Support Center being put in place and being up and running with the aim of creating a network of stakeholders across different data spaces to share and exchange on best practices, but also to coordinate the development of data spaces, to assure common standards and interoperability, and come up with common requirements. And then from a more, let's say, technical viewpoint, and you can see this in the lower part of this chart, we have the smart middleware solutions that will actually provide a common middleware for data spaces, both to help data spaces to create their internal federation, but also, and I think that's a very important point, to make sure that data spaces are interoperable across them, in between them, but also with other key digital infrastructures, like the high-performance computing, like edge and cloud services, like the AI testing and experimentation facilities. And SIMPL covers different dimensions just to mention, of course, there are data services like data transfer, excuse me, federation management services, infrastructure connector services, etc. Unfortunately, I need to rush through things, so I will just get to the next slide if it moves. Okay. Now, we have been talking about EOS before, EOS being the basis for the research and innovation data space. And I think that's our vision of how we see EOS, at least from an infrastructure point of view, as a federated system of systems. So we see basically EOS as the infrastructure to bring together different national nodes, different thematic clusters, different research infrastructures, different industry resources, but also the resources from the EC public administration. And you can see this layer. And as was already mentioned, there's also an ongoing procurement for the EOS platform that will, in particular, provide the functionalities for the core, for the exchange, and for some infrastructure, compute, and storage services. I will not go any further into detail considering the time constraints. Of course, as mentioned already before, very important, there is the EuroHPC infrastructure being put in place under the joint undertaking EuroHPC that has a total budget of approximately 7 billion euro over the duration of the current MFF 2021 to 2027, with the main aim to develop, deploy, and extend a world-leading supercomputing, quantum computing infrastructure, but also service and data infrastructure ecosystem. What you can see here, and again, I will not go into detail, is the different sites. And I can say we, and you all know this, currently with the EuroHPC infrastructure, 2 of our HPCs are among the top 5 globally. We have now 2 sites being decided for the exascale computers that will be put in place. The first one is in Jülich in Germany, another one in France. And there have also been decisions on locations of the 6 quantum computers that will come into place. Now, there is an important component to this, and this is actually how to make the infrastructure accessible, how to make it link. And again, there is you can see this schematically in this. So there is the idea of more than the idea, there's the concept of the federation layer to enable access for different users, for different user groups, scientists, SMEs, and beyond, and to allow access to the full network of computers through a federation system. And on the top one, you just see how the different digital infrastructures would also connect to them, like data spaces, like Destination Earth, the public sector, but of course also the scientific community and EOSC. Now, I will speed up a bit and not go into depth as concerns artificial intelligence. We have heard quite some comprehensive presentations earlier this morning, what is needed. Just to mention, also for AI, with a view to bring artificial intelligence to the market more quickly, to create trust and to improve its uptake in Europe, the testing and experimentation facilities funded by the Digital Euro program are currently put in place. They will start on the 1st of January 2023, and the sectors currently covered by the testing and experimentation facilities are agri-food, healthcare, manufacturing, and smart cities and community. Not to say that, of course, on the AI part, there's much more being undertaken, like the AI on demand platform, which you will not find on this slide. Probably to close with one example on where different digital infrastructures, on where our scientific excellence, on where different user groups, everything is being put together in order to provide a public service, in order to provide us with the best evidence that we have to fight the impacts of climate change, to best define our climate adaptation strategies. And this example is the Destination Earth example that looks into providing a very accurate digital twin of the Earth, making use of all the data that we have through the data lake, making use of the high-performance computing capacities being put in place, and making use of the scientific excellence that we have in terms of weather modeling, in terms of climate modeling, in order to give an easy-to-use, reliable information system to policymakers to encounter one of the challenges that we have right now, weather extremes and long-term climate adaptation. And as you can see here, and I think this is a point that is valid for many of the e-infrastructures, is this is a long-term undertaking. Thank you very much. I will stop here.
Tobias. In view of time, I suggest that we reserve questions, if any, for later, if you're still around, Tobias.
I will need to leave, unfortunately, in 50 minutes for another meeting.
Well, then we can find you and ask questions later. Meanwhile, Jan starts up the presentation of our next presenter, which is our colleague Volker. So if you're ready, go ahead.
Figures out the techniques. So of course we talked already a lot about EOS. So I wanted to focus just where I see the e-IRG EOS connection now. So I mean, when we started EOS 2016 with the first projects, there were a lot of you or your organizations were involved in EOS pilot and so on. There was a very strong presence of the particle physics community, astroparticle physics community, and so on. And a lot of e-infrastructures were very present. Then there was a bit of a shift, perhaps. There was a very strong focus on fairization of data. We saw this in Stefan's presentation, that this is a cultural shift. So this takes a bit longer. So there were a lot of projects around this topic. And perhaps one got a bit the impression that the e-infrastructures were a bit forgotten. Well, not completely forgotten, but were not so much in the focus. Now we see with the procurement, for example, with the foreseen focus on the platform, on the marketplace, you see the EO nodes where we still have to figure out what this means then on the national nodes, the EOS national nodes, how we put this in place and what the potential roles of your e-infrastructures are in there. But it's clear that in order to make EOS work, we need underlying e-infrastructures for the services. So that's kind of an obvious part. And so if I would have to put a vision there, so we want to also be able to have workflows in EOS with a certain capacity of e-infrastructures participating in that. So in this sense, you have a very vital interest through e-IRG to participate in this discussion. What is possible? What are the risks for you? How do you deal with the different demands from the different data spaces which are going to come to you? I'm pretty sure, at least to some of you. So we have to work on this development from the institutional to national to European scale. And if I may say so, I think we have to first figure out on the national level how to share resources. In some countries, this works already very well. I mean, we saw the example from the Netherlands where everything is very centralized. In other countries, you have a lot of different actors, and it's not so obvious how to share resources, how to work across platforms and domains. And then we have to enter the international level. So what's the role for e-IRG there? So the question is, which e-infrastructures can, want, and will provide services to the EOSC, and under which condition? So that's something I think we have to learn from you. We as EOSC have to know from you. And we would also like to have your view on the context with the European data spaces, what your expectation is there, what the pressure on the national level for you is there. So we have already several mechanisms put in place. So we have this e-IRG EOSC steering board liaison group. We haven't been always so active, but this is still ongoing. Then you heard a lot about this task force with e-IRG as observer. I wouldn't underline too much observer. This is a discussion group. We want to have results. We want to recommend at the European level to the Commission, but also to the other actors. So I don't think it's so important if you're a member or if you're observer, as long as you enter the discussion and you bring your expertise there. And we have the e-infrastructure coordination meetings. which are also ongoing. So I think what is very important is to have relevant insights into the discussion beyond the obvious. So something where you say, well, please look at this. This is important. This is a risk, or this we are not be able to do in the future for EOS, but also in the data spaces context. So that's it in order to make Arjen happy.
Well, you're not going to make me happy, but thank you very much. And I would like to invite Ute to follow up. And meanwhile, Jan will start the presentation. So it's EOSC steering board and now the EOSC organization itself. So please take the microphone and.
So let's find the slides. And I would like to basically bring you not up to speed because many of you are member in the EOSC Association. And I would just briefly summarize where do we stand in the discussion about the future of EOSC post 2027. And some of the slides are well known, and so I will go through them briefly. But the entire journey started a year ago on the 4th of July last year when we had an informal meeting in Brussels. I need to share that, where we had an informal meeting in the tripartite context, as we call it, between the member states, the European Commission and the EOSC Association. And there we discussed we need to have a kind of process to come to the future. And since the future is basically now, we need to work on that. So that was last year. Where do we stand a year later, and how have we involved all our stakeholders in the association? The first thing was that a reflection paper was drafted by the Commission, discussed in the tripartite context, and it was in November last year. And the questions were addressed there: where do we plan to be by 2027? What governance do we need for EOSC Federation post 2027? What funding and governance models do we need? And when do we have to also pitch that into the next framework program? So that is what happened in November last year. We discussed it with our members in the association at the General Assembly. There was a discussion in the tripartite where we said, okay, the system we have now, it's not really one to carry forward in the future because it is not really fit for purpose what needs to be addressed. And so that guided the discussion that then went on in the Commission, in the steering board, and in the EOSC Association. We had it at our General Assembly in November. And after that, we wrote a reflection back to the European Commission saying that we do prefer actually a more stronger role in that sense that we have a better governance with a stronger mandate relative to the projects, for example, and our preference was to investigate the possibilities in an Article 185 initiative or 187, which is a joint undertaking, to look into how is GEANT being organized, what can we learn for there, or also think about a European corporate society. That was in the beginning of the year. This is, I think, also a well-known slide from the European Commission proposed by Michel Scoop after this first round of reflection paper to look at it from a more task-related point of view, which will be the tasks that need to be addressed after 2027. And then we have the deploying and operating of the EU EOSC node and its maintenance. As it is now, it's procured through the European Commission. How should it be in the future? And there we have various options, whether it should be entrusted to another legal entity with budget implementation tasks, possibly in the context of a European partnership, or continues to manage directly grants and procurement actions, possibly in the context of a European partnership. And then we had other three tasks, like the enabling of fair data and services for science that are currently addressed under grants and possibly could be addressed under grants in the future, but what is the overall framework for that? So that is where we stood, so to speak, in the discussion. Then what happened, we again met and socialized all of this with our member base. That was at the General Assembly in May. Again, many of you were there. And then we discussed it in table discussions. So a very, very interactive format to collect the input from our members, because they are the ones who should have an active role in shaping the future. And especially the four colors here on the bottom, they were dealing with those tasks I've just read out. Day later, tripartite collaboration. We met online to discuss more or less, again, similar issues, because obviously we want to go to the future together. And there, People online cannot hear me, right? So, okay. And the last two slides are just those we have socialized last week in a meeting with the Infra-EOSC projects is where do we stand today? Today, we reach out to our stakeholders. We manage the EOSC brands. We monitor the additional activities coming from our members, and we contribute to the Horizon era actions. What could we do in the future? We could further develop and govern the EOSC EU node, manage the AI, manage PID policy, manage an interoperability framework, and manage the compliance framework. This is what we could do. And this is a list of considerations that will now guide what we have to do in the association. Discuss that. What do we want to be and be in charge of or look after in the future? Run operations, do development, have the operations run, have development done, implement the federating structure, set the rules of participation, suggest standards, tools, and services, be the fair police, improve the interoperability, or be the interoperability police, seek alignment with other regions in the world. Those are all the questions that are on the table that need to be addressed and where the association needs to have an opinion and form an opinion. I want to and be the entrusted legal entity to operate or also run grants. So this is indeed what we have to discuss, decide, and make a proposal on. I wanted to end with a positive note and also with a look into the future. Because, I mean, we had in the last 2 days the big council presidency here in Lund. And I mean, it's encouraging to see that it ended with a Lund declaration on maximizing the benefits of research data, where the Swedish presidency of the Council of the European Union calls for reinforcing, accelerating and maximizing the benefits of fair data and open research data in Europe, within scientific community and through research infrastructures to increase the overall research and innovation performance of the European research area and strengthen the outreach to and impact on industry and society. I think this is very encouraging to see that the Swedish presidency also built on the French presidency, made open science, fair data part of their presidency priorities. And here we are. And I think that should be your encouragement after 20 years now to look also to the future and have your participation in that. Thanks a lot.
While I'm being helped with this thing on my head again, I would like to introduce the last speaker of this first block. That is Pierre Gronier. Remote. Okay. Are you remote? Are you present remotely? Yes, I see you. No, but I see that. At least that Pierre is there. Pierre will talk on behalf of Gaia X. Yeah, you are still muted, Pierre. So if you can unmute and share the presentation, please go ahead. Do you hear us, Pierre? Could you? Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Very good. Very good. Okay, go ahead.
I've have the slides and I've understood that we were running a bit late, so I will probably try to squeeze as much as I can in a short time frame.
So take your time. We want to follow you and looking forward to your to talks.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Zoom crashed the first time.
That's just, as I said, it's a short intervention. Just.
Of course, you shouldn't feel rushed, but I don't want to be too impolite to the ones that are at the end of the program. So, yeah, go ahead, please. Well, you have to. Well, he is not there anymore, I think. Zoom quit unexpectedly. Oh dear, oh dear. Oh. Catherine is here. Well. Good. Yeah, we lost you, so you have to start again.
I know Zoom keep crashing. So, and again.
Yes.
Unfortunately, Zoom doesn't want me to share my screen. The application is crashing every time I'm trying. So while I start, maybe someone locally can share the slide I've sent in advance this morning, and then I will just talk over. Unfortunately, sorry for that. Just let me know when you have something in front of you and something that you can see. I don't hear anything back, so I will just start the presentation. So I will take the discussion of the infrastructure a bit differently from a different point of view, a different angle, from the angle of the data spaces. To build the data spaces, you need to have a governance that can be operationalized. You need to have infrastructure that will be adopting this governance. And you need to have parties that adopt the governance and use this infrastructure. The issue or the problems, maybe opportunities, is that sharing data is not new. That's the good part. The part to be improved is that there are thousands, literally I mean that, thousands of existing setups that could qualify as data space or ecosystems. However, they are not discoverable, and their level of governance infrastructure interoperabilities are hard, if not impossible to assess. The scaling is also very expensive. So with that regards, GAIX would like to offer some proposal. The first one, that's the notion of one federated catalog for services and product. That's one of the, I will say, most critical part of the GAIX deliverable. If that we talk in the previous session also about different initiatives to create more ecosystem to federate them. The first thing when we have a company that looks for services, it's where do I find them? So federated catalog is one way to quickly find services and products. The second thing,
I found your presentation. Which slide are you on?
Next one. Next one.
Yeah, number 2.
Number 3. So that's what I was presenting, the data spaces. Then you have possibility, opportunities, and problems exactly here. So you have federated catalogs. And what we propose for GAIX also is a worldwide ready governance based on European values. Sometimes we hear European rules, but we have a lot of scenarios, in fact, that that will involve partners that are outside of Europe. So for partners outside of Europe, giving services to European citizens, laws will apply, the rules apply. That's the GDPR, for example, the DGA, the DA, and so on. However, you have sometimes in your entire pipeline for cars, for batteries, for clothes, cosmetics, and so on, partners that are outside of Europe doing stuff and business outside of Europe, for products that are done in Europe, assembled in Europe, sold outside of Europe. So more than European rules, which I believe it's going to be very hard to impose outside, we want to have a governance that is easy to reach based on European values, transparency, openness, and so on. And we want this governance to be extendable per domain, per vertical and local market. Of course, if we extend those governance, then you will have some differences. And that's the last item that we want to propose that we are working on. That's the capacity to measure how interoperable those data spaces or those ecosystems are. And trying to make them align 100% is never going to work. Nature doesn't like void, it's always grow. And the regulation, that governance will always be later than what the market will do. So if we want to steer and help this market or those initiatives to converge, more than trying to show muscles and say, I'm bigger than yours and so on, is to provide a metrics that enable them to measure how far they are from each other. It's like when you are doing machine learning or stochastic gradient descent, you need to have a measurement, L2, L1, and so on. So that's what we propose here. A basic governance, baseline governance that can be extended for domains, vertical needs, local markets, and a mean to measure this interoperability. Next slide, please. And the way we are doing that, so I had several animation in the slide, so you can click, I think, 1 or 2, 3 times. We base ourselves on the on the 3 layers plane that we have in the in the NIST paper. You have the trust plane, that's the common governance for GAIA-X. The management plane, that's the data space. It's more related to business. And the federation. The federation will be the equivalent of the infrastructure. The way we work together is all of those layers is the common governance by GAIA-X that's adopted, extended by data space authorities. For example, we work a lot with the data space business support centers, by data intermediaries that are going to be created through the DGA that was mentioned before, but that they need to have a common reference framework, and that's what we've worked with GAIA-X. To be noted that this common governance framework by GAIA-X is not meant, and it's not built just by GAIA-X, but it's also in line with other European initiatives. So we work, for example, with iShare, with Crossroad, that have already existing running services. Then you have this second blue row that is the governance between GAIA-X and the federations, and that's for seeking interoperability. It's very much linked to the ontology and how you describe services. I have a slide for that. And the last arrow on the right is this decentralized architecture enabling many-to-many relations. This arrow here is not involving GAIA-X at all or the common governance, because how we build that is using verifiable controls and a decentralized model. So running out of time, and I don't want to just throw at you some more acronyms for technical specification. The important part here is that you have a common governance layer that we work together, not just GAIA-X, but other initiatives. And then that's being extended by data spaces, that's being reused by infrastructure providers on how they can describe services, how they can compose services, how you can enable this continuum edge computing from cloud to edge, that from IoT to edge that we've heard also. It's by combining them together, because we know that in Europe you have a lot of SMEs, and we are convinced that this is not by creating a big hyperscaler, a big European hyperscalers that we will win. It's by being able to combine all the existing one that we have. So this notion of a decentralized knowledge graph is something that is very important. And next slide, please. The way we implement this knowledge graph is by using existing standards, so nothing really new, linked data, verifiable controls, and reasoning on the graph. The graph that is being used as the backend in a transparent is not like a nice picture I took on some web search engine. That's in fact our GAIA-X ontology on how we describe legal participant, natural participant, physical resources, virtual resources, services, products, data products, and so on. And of course, this is just the one that we have specified because we couldn't find existing ones. Otherwise, that can be also expanded. OWL basic work. And we really much also rely on the infrastructure. So while that might seem or hear a bit like fluffy, okay, credentials, fine. We anchor every possible decision point to the hardware, meaning that how can you trust the other party to execute the policy or the reasoning the way you intend it to be? Because you are, for example, to be able, you are able to have confidential computing or remote workload attestation. Focusing on the time, next slide, please. And I think that's the last one. A bit of a highlight on the, oh no, sorry, the last before the end. Highlight, so how that will work. basically, all the arrow that I've mentioned before could be summarized by an exchange of verifiable credentials. And that's a bit the nice part of it, is that the technical foundation to enable this model is very slim, very lean. It's not like you need to use my services. It's declare with a common ontology that is being extended. Also, the basic line one is rather simple. And then this is very much about exchanging information which contains policy and being able to perform reasoning on those policies. So I would be very happy to have an hour explanation on how to reason on ODRL or policies, but for maybe a next time. Important part is that through that, where we are able to federate other initiatives. So I gave some logos here. We work also with FiWare. We work with the GXFS project. We work with the DSSC, the SIMPL project, the e-IRG for the European Blockchain Service Infrastructure, the IDSA architecture, and the Eclipse for the Eclipse Data Space component also. There is an initiative. Next slide, please. And that is the last one. Just one word on the Data Space Business Alliance and how GaiaX works with IDSA and FiWare. GaiaX very much focus, and I think that's what I wanted to express during those small presentation, on the cross data space governance. I mean, before we have interoperability at the technical layer, like which socket and which protocol, which API version numbers I use. That's usually very much a handshake between managers or deciders and aligning on a common governance. So that's what we want to work on. And then we very much complement each other with IDSA, which focus then on the data exchange, and FiWare to provide the building blocks. And that will be the next slide is just the question open for question, if any, but I think that we are running out of time. And if you like to know more, there is a recording on YouTube. Instead of giving a link, I just give you some keywords to use on YouTube search engine, and you will find the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pierre, for this. Meanwhile, Jan is preparing the next presentation. Catherine, please, could you... Now we are in the block with, I would almost call them the incumbents, the 5 e-infrastructures that are there for quite some time. GEANT, EGI, EUDAT, Brace, and OpenAir.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I would like to thank e-IRG for giving me the opportunity to address you all in the context of your 20th anniversary. I'd like to congratulate you all for your commitment and achievements over the past 20 years, of course. 20 years ago, we as e-IRG and European infrastructures were the pioneers in the digital world. We had to deliver the pioneer work of exploring new frontiers, delivering new services, and through that work claiming new territory, showing our leadership. Today in 2023, with the twin transition of green and digital, and the digital decade, we face a completely new task. Everything is now digital. The pandemic has shown the absolute dependency modern societies have on digital infrastructures and services. And the erstwhile pioneer, all of us, we are now required to adapt to a new environment, an environment where we are no longer